Frances Ridley Havergal was a 19th-century British hymn writer, poet, and devout Christian whose hymns continue to resonate with believers worldwide. Born into a world of music and worship, she transformed personal suffering into profound devotion. Despite lifelong illness and the pain of loss, Frances' faith only deepened, inspiring timeless hymns like "Take My Life and Let It Be" and "Like a River Glorious." Her words, written from a place of vulnerability and strength, invite us into a life of full surrender to God. Discover the remarkable journey of a woman who, in her weakness, found the strength to leave a legacy of unwavering peace and trust in God. Early life and spiritual formation. Frances was born on December 14, 1836 in Astley, Worcestershire, England, to a deeply Christian family. Her father, William Havergal, was an Anglican clergyman, musician, and hymn writer who influenced her faith and love for hymnody. Surrounded by an atmosphere of spiritual and intellectual discipline, Frances displayed a precocious intellect and spiritual sensitivity from a young age. She was reading by age 4 and began memorizing large portions of scripture, which would later influence her writing. Tragedy struck early in her life when her mother passed away in 1848, leaving Frances, then only 11 years old, to grapple with loss and suffering. Her mother's death was a pivotal event, and Frances found solace in the scriptures and hymns that her mother had loved. This period marked the beginning of her personal commitment to Christ. Although she was raised in a Christian home, she struggled for some time with fully understanding salvation, eventually giving her life to Christ in 1851 at the age of 14. Education and a heart for God. Frances' education was extensive, fluent in several languages, including Hebrew and Greek. She excelled academically, especially in literature and music. She also studied French and German, which enabled her to read the Bible and other religious texts in multiple languages. Her scholarly dedication wasn't merely academic, but rather a part of her earnest pursuit of God, as she wanted to understand His Word as deeply as possible. Despite her academic and musical abilities, Frances struggled with illness throughout her life. Her health often confined her to periods of rest and limited activity. Nevertheless, she used these times to grow spiritually, praying, reading scripture, and composing hymns and poems. Her physical weakness and frailty led her to a complete reliance on God, allowing her to connect with others who struggled with illness and suffering. The writing of "Take My Life and Let It Be" and her life of dedication. One of Frances' most well-known hymns, "Take My Life and Let It Be," was born out of her desire to live a life fully consecrated to God. In February 1874, she visited a home where 10 individuals were present. She felt prompted to pray for each person, praying that everyone in the home would come to know Christ. By the end of her visit, her prayers had been answered. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she returned to her room and wrote the lines to this hymn as a prayer of surrender, asking God to take every aspect of her life for His use. This hymn captures her profound desire for holiness and her commitment to live every part of her life in devotion to God, including her hands, voice, wealth, and intellect. Ongoing health struggles and perseverance in faith. Though her health declined throughout her life, Frances chose to trust God in her suffering. She often struggled with feelings of inadequacy due to her physical limitations and frail health. However, rather than allowing these limitations to diminish her faith, Frances used them as an opportunity to deepen her dependence on God. In her writing, she openly discussed how her weaknesses brought her closer to Christ and helped her understand the strength found in reliance on God. Frances' commitment to writing hymns and devotional poetry continued even in her final years. Her weakened health did not prevent her from composing some of her most enduring works, such as "Like a River Glorious," a hymn that exudes peace and trust in God. This hymn reflects the tranquility she found in her relationship with Christ, a peace she sought to communicate to others through her writing. A legacy of humility and selflessness. Despite her significant accomplishments, Frances remained humble. She famously prayed for her works to be hidden from sight and that any praise would be directed to God. She shunned fame, choosing instead to keep her focus on Christ. This humility extended into her personal life, as she often used her inheritance to fund missionary work and support the less fortunate. Frances saw herself as a servant, willing to give all she had for God's glory. In her final days, Frances was bedridden, but her faith never wavered. She passed away on June 3, 1879, at the age of 42. Her final words reportedly were, "It's all perfect peace. I am resting in Jesus." Reflections on her life and encouragement for today's Christians. Frances Havergal's life is a powerful testament to the strength that comes from a life surrendered to God. Her ongoing health challenges, bouts of loneliness, and her willingness to remain humble in the face of potential fame make her story deeply relatable and inspiring for Christians today. Here are some aspects of her life that might particularly encourage believers. Complete surrender. Frances's hymn, "Take My Life and Let It Be," remains a call to live a life wholly devoted to God. In a world where personal ambition and self-fulfillment often take precedence, her life demonstrates the beauty of yielding everything to God. For Christians today, her example encourages a deeper examination of what it means to let go of personal desires and fully embrace God's will. Finding strength in weakness. Frances didn't allow her health issues to discourage her. Instead, she saw her physical frailty as an opportunity to rely on God's strength. Her life serves as a reminder that God often uses our weaknesses to draw us closer to Him. For Christians facing trials, her story encourages trust in God's sustaining power. Sacrificial service and humility. Frances' humility and generosity in using her resources for others reflect the heart of a servant. Her refusal to seek recognition and her willingness to give for God's work serve as a model for Christians today to seek God's glory over personal recognition. Perseverance in the face of suffering. Frances faced suffering with grace, continually turning to God in her times of pain. Her story reassures believers that even in the most challenging times, God's presence is a constant source of peace. Joy in worship and devotion. Above all, Frances' life was characterized by a profound joy in worship. Whether in illness or health, she praised God and used her talents to draw others to Him. Her example reminds Christians that true joy is found in worshiping and walking closely with God. Conclusion. Frances Ridley Havergal's life was a hymn of devotion and a prayer of surrender. She remains an inspiration, showing that a life dedicated to Christ is one of true peace, joy, and purpose, even in the face of trials. Her hymns continue to encourage believers to draw closer to God, trust in His provision, and commit every part of their lives to His service. Through her life and songs, Frances invites Christians to experience the fullness of life found in complete surrender to God.